On January 18th, global attention shifted north to Greenland. As the United States expanded its military presence on the island, pressure inside the Arctic increased significantly. Radar activity intensified across the region. Naval movements soon followed. Russia was forced to react, pushing its assets closer to contested routes. Greenland quickly transformed from a mere geographic location into strategic leverage. This growing tension created vulnerabilities elsewhere. While major powers focused on the Arctic, movement along Russian supply routes became visible. Ukraine did not create this situation. It recognized the opportunity. Using intelligence generated by the Greenland standoff, Kyiv acted. What followed was not a coincidence, but a direct consequence. Because when Greenland reshapes the battlefield, events far from the ice begin to change as well. For decades, Greenland was viewed as irrelevant in global conflicts. It was seen as a remote island covered in ice, far from traditional battlefields, with no armies and no front lines. That assumption no longer applies. Modern war is no longer decided only by troops or weapons. It is decided by surveillance, radar coverage, early warning systems, and real-time information. Greenland sits directly at the heart of that system. Its geographic position allows for the continuous monitoring of the Arctic and the North Atlantic. From this location, long-range missile launches can be detected in their earliest stages. Naval movements can be tracked, and air routes between Europe and North America can be observed. What once appeared empty has become one of the most strategically valuable positions in the Northern Hemisphere. As Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening, and military activity in the region is increasing. The Arctic is no longer isolated. It is becoming a critical strategic corridor. Control of that corridor depends heavily on Greenland. When the United States strengthened its presence there, it was not about territory. It was about visibility and control. Whoever dominates Greenland does not just control land, they control information. And in modern warfare, information determines who reacts first. Russia understands this clearly, because Greenland is not just ice. It is a surveillance line pointed directly at Russia's northern forces. For Moscow, Greenland is not a distant island. It is a strategic choke point that directly affects national survival. Every year, Moscow invests billions into its northern forces. Yet, all of that power depends on a single geographic reality: access to the Atlantic Ocean. Russia's most important naval asset is the Northern Fleet, based on the Kola Peninsula. This fleet controls over 60% of Russia's sea-based nuclear weapons and operates the majority of its ballistic missile submarines. These submarines are not designed to stay near the coast. Their purpose is deterrence, to disappear into the ocean and remain undetected. But there is only one route out. To reach the Atlantic, Russian submarines must pass through the GIUK gap, Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. This corridor is less than 1,500 kilometers wide, yet it determines whether Russia's nuclear forces can operate freely or remain trapped. Greenland sits at the western gate of that passage. From positions around Greenland, NATO can deploy undersea sonar arrays, long-range maritime patrol aircraft, and satellite-linked tracking systems. Modern sensors are capable of detecting submarine movement from hundreds of kilometers away, even beneath thick Arctic water layers. This means a Russian submarine can be detected within minutes of leaving port. For Moscow, this is unacceptable. A submarine that can be tracked is no longer a deterrent. It becomes a target, and once deterrence collapses, strategic balance collapses with it. Russia has spent more than $300 billion modernizing its nuclear forces since 2011. Yet a single geographic bottleneck, Greenland, threatens to expose that entire investment. That is why Moscow views increased NATO activity near Greenland not as defense, but as pressure. Not as diplomacy, but as containment. Not observation, but restriction. Every new radar upgrade, every patrol flight, and every satellite pass tightens the space in which Russian forces can maneuver. The Arctic, once considered Russia's safe zone, is slowly shrinking. And this growing pressure explains one critical fact. When Greenland changes, Russia is forced to respond. So what happens when Russia decides it can no longer accept this pressure? The United States did not move into Greenland suddenly. What is happening today is the result of long-term military planning that accelerated rapidly after 2014 and intensified again after 2022. Washington understood one core reality. Whoever controls Greenland controls visibility across the entire North Atlantic. At the center of this strategy stands Pitifik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. Located just 1,200 kilometers from the Arctic Circle, it is the northernmost U.S. military installation in the world. From this single location, American systems monitor an area stretching over 6 million square kilometers. The base hosts ballistic missile early warning radar, capable of detecting launches within seconds, not minutes. These sensors are integrated directly into U.S. Strategic Command. This means data from Greenland flows instantly into America's nuclear decision network. Since 2020, the United States has invested more than $1.5 billion upgrading infrastructure, radar arrays, and satellite communication systems. They have also built hardened facilities capable of operating in temperatures below minus 40 degrees Celsius. These upgrades were not defensive in nature alone. They were designed for constant operational readiness. Aircraft activity has increased sharply. U.S. reconnaissance flights over the North Atlantic and Arctic routes have risen by over 40% in recent years. Maritime patrol aircraft now operate on extended rotations, tracking surface vessels and underwater movement far beyond previous limits. From Russia's perspective, this changes everything. Greenland is no longer a passive observation post. It has become an active node in NATO's combat network. Information gathered here guides naval deployments, submarine tracking, and air patrol planning across the entire northern flank. This is how modern warfare unfolds. Not through explosions, but through continuous exposure. Russian forces do not need to be attacked to feel pressure. They only need to be seen. Every radar sweep reduces uncertainty. Every satellite pass shortens reaction time. Every upgraded sensor tightens the operational space available to Moscow. And while no shots are fired, a silent battle is underway. It is a battle measured in detection time, tracking accuracy, and decision speed. As NATO's presence grows around Greenland, Russia faces a strategic dilemma: accept constant surveillance or move forces forward to challenge it. That dilemma does not remain theoretical for long. Pressure at this level always produces movement. At 2:40 a.m., under Arctic darkness, orders were transmitted to Russia's northern fleet. Several Russian naval and transport vessels departed their bases on the Kola Peninsula under strict emission control. Navigation lights were reduced, and radio traffic was limited. The objective was clear: demonstrate that Russian military logistics could still move through the northern corridor. Remaining passive was no longer acceptable. Continuous NATO surveillance had reduced Russia's operational freedom. Movement became a necessity. Within the formation were 5 Russian transport ships carrying military cargo. These vessels were not frontline warships. They carried ammunition, technical components, and replacement systems intended to support Russian operations further south. Their safe arrival was critical. The route avoided standard commercial lanes and pushed into a sparsely traveled maritime zone. Russian planners identified this space as a strategic gap. It lay between regular NATO patrol patterns, offering reduced predictability but no real protection. Conditions were severe. Freezing temperatures limited visibility, and rough seas complicated coordination. Yet, these same factors were expected to degrade radar and satellite performance. Moscow accepted the risk. As the Russian convoy continued forward, formation integrity began to weaken. Speed differences increased, separation grew, and escort coverage thinned. The distance between ships grew steadily. By 4:10 a.m., the Russian vessels were no longer moving as a unified group. From onboard command positions, the transit still appeared controlled. No warnings were issued, and no hostile contacts were detected. The movement remained classified as routine. But modern warfare does not always punish mistakes immediately. It waits. As the Russian ships entered the strategic gap, they moved directly into a window where surveillance turns into opportunity. By 4:35 a.m., the situation had shifted. As Russian vessels moved deeper into the Arctic corridor, surveillance activity around Greenland intensified. Radar stations increased scan frequency, and satellite tasking was reprioritized. Maritime monitoring systems redirected their focus northward. The response was automatic, not political. Greenland sits at the intersection of multiple early warning networks. Data from radar arrays, orbital sensors, and maritime tracking systems converges here before flowing into NATO's command structure. When activity rises near Arctic routes, the system reacts immediately. The Russian convoy did not disappear into isolation. It entered layered observation. Course changes were recorded and speed variations were measured. The growing separation between escort vessels and transport ships allowed for individual identification. This widening distance created exposure, not because defenses failed, but because attention shifted. With NATO assets heavily concentrated around Greenland itself, movements outside direct patrol zones received reduced coverage. Surveillance detected the convoy's profile, yet authority to intervene remained divided across commands. This produced a dangerous condition: visibility without an immediate response. Tracking data was shared across Allied intelligence networks. The information was precise: vessel classification, heading, spacing, and estimated cargo relevance. It did not mark targets. It revealed an opportunity. Ukraine received the same operational picture through intelligence sharing channels. No orders followed and no permission was needed. Only information changed hands. In modern warfare, that is often enough. Because when awareness arrives before command decisions, the initiative moves instantly. At that moment, the confrontation was no longer centered on Greenland's defenses. Greenland had already done something more decisive. It had created the opening. The Russian military transport ships were not moving alone. They sailed as part of a protected maritime formation, accompanied by naval escort vessels. These escorts were assigned to safeguard high-value military equipment during the Arctic transit. They were equipped with surface search radar, air defense systems, and electronic surveillance suites. For several hours, the maritime transit remained stable. Then, radar conditions changed. Escort operators began detecting fast-moving aerial contacts approaching at low altitude. The signals appeared briefly, disappearing into sea clutter before returning seconds later. Speed and flight behavior confirmed the contacts were military aircraft. The targets were identified as Ukrainian MiG-29 fighters. Alert status was raised across the formation. Escort vessels activated fire control radar and shifted air defense systems from standby to active tracking. What had been a routine protected movement now entered a combat posture. As the MiG-29s attempted to adjust course, surface-to-air missiles were launched from the escort ships. The engagement unfolded within seconds. Low altitude limited maneuvering space, while distance compressed reaction time. 2 Ukrainian MiG-29 aircraft were struck. Radar returns vanished shortly afterward. The remaining fighters immediately disengaged and withdrew from the area at maximum speed. Russian escorts did not pursue. Their priority remained the protection of the transport ships and the cargo on board. From Moscow's perspective, the immediate threat had been neutralized, but the cost was visible. Aircraft had fallen into the sea, and pilots were lost. The Arctic route was no longer just a monitored passage. It had become an active combat zone. After the loss of 2 aircraft, Ukrainian command reassessed the situation within minutes. Continuing the same attack pattern would only lead to further losses. Russian escort ships were now fully alert, with air defense systems locked and radar coverage concentrated on expected flight paths. A different decision was made. The remaining pilots received new instructions. The objective did not change. The Russian transport ships remained the priority. However, the approach shifted away from direct confrontation and toward exploitation. Instead of focusing on the escorts, Ukrainian aircraft redirected their attention toward the logistical core of the formation. The transport ships themselves were slow, heavily loaded, and limited in defensive capability. Their protection depended entirely on coordination, and that coordination had already been disrupted. Moments later, the pattern of engagement changed. Strikes hit the transport vessels in rapid sequence. Explosions erupted near cargo sections, and fires spread across the decks. Secondary detonations followed, consistent with the presence of stored ammunition and sensitive equipment. At least 3 transport ships lost propulsion. 1 suffered catastrophic internal damage, forcing the crew to abandon control. Thick smoke rose across the sea, visible from kilometers away. Post-engagement assessments indicated the destruction of large quantities of military equipment. This included ammunition stocks, drone components, and electronic systems intended for frontline deployment. Estimated losses reach hundreds of millions of dollars, not including the strategic impact of delayed resupply. Russian escort vessels remained operational, but their mission had failed. The cargo would not arrive. What followed was silence. Not because the fight had ended, but because the outcome was already decided. Ukraine had paid a price, but Russia lost something far harder to recover: time. And in a prolonged war, time can be more valuable than warships. The strike did not end the confrontation. It changed its shape. What happened was not only the loss of ships or equipment, it was the exposure of a new reality. Greenland had moved from background geography to active strategic space. No borders were crossed there, and no weapons were fired from its territory. Yet, actions taken around Greenland influenced decisions far beyond the Arctic. For Russia, the message was clear. Northern routes were no longer insulated. Movement once considered secure could now be observed, analyzed, and exploited. The Arctic was no longer a buffer. It had become a pressure zone. For the United States and NATO, the conclusion was equally direct. Surveillance dominance creates leverage. Visibility alters behavior. Control of information reshapes operational freedom without open confrontation. And for Ukraine, the event proved something critical. Modern warfare does not depend only on proximity. Distance no longer protects logistics. When data flows faster than forces, geography loses its traditional meaning. This is how new fronts emerge. Not with troops advancing, but with sensors activating. Not with declarations, but with tracking systems locking on. Greenland is no longer silent. It is now part of the battlefield, a place where war is not fought with explosions, but with awareness. And once awareness becomes permanent, escalation no longer needs intention. It only needs movement. What unfolded around Greenland was not a single event. It was an indicator, a demonstration of how modern conflict now expands through surveillance, data, and positioning, rather than open invasion. Greenland may appear distant, but its influence is growing. As major powers increase their presence in the Arctic, decisions made there will continue to shape events far beyond the ice. The battlefield is evolving, not toward larger armies, but toward faster awareness. And in that environment, the side that detects movement first often controls the outcome. If this analysis helped you better understand what is happening behind the headlines, please press like and subscribe to the channel for future breakdowns of global military developments. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the Arctic could become the next major strategic front? We will continue tracking how this silent region is reshaping modern warfare.